last time I met with Unmin was at Stefan Stefan G's funeral, and actually that's one of the last times I ran into you as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That was like
So
two years ago, right?
yeah, and yeah, no, I was just very intrigued by what you just mentioned now, in terms of your interview with him. So there's a lot that I'm looking forward, by the way, to that episode to learn more about Unmin's journey up until this point. But yeah, on our conversation here, and we're beginning, it's we have a relatively small community, right? That's pretty tight knit. We kind of know everyone knows each other for the most part, and I feel very grateful to be a part of this in some way. But yeah,
you and I have history that goes back to I wouldn't say to the late 90s, right? You work with somebody that we were, my partners and I at the time were very close to, is DJ Slim. And you worked in that world, and we were promoting clubs and we were promoting events at the time, my partners and I. And tell me a little bit about that time for you.
Yeah. So it reminds me of like the what they call, what is the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So you and I ended up not really meeting until probably almost like 15, 20 years later, but we somehow circled around each other in some way. And a story, when you guys were promoting the parties in the 90s, it was like almost the mid 90s, I want to say, right? Is that accurate? 95, 96, around that time?
Mid 90s, yeah, mid 90s. And 94 is when I started with my partner, 94. Okay. And Trilogy.
So, Trilogy. So name dropping Trilogy, and whoever's watching this from Orange County might, if they're old enough, might know what we're talking about. But you guys threw the best parties in that era. And I remember driving up from San Diego to Orange County because that's where the scene was at. And honestly, you guys would put out some promotional music, mix CDs, just to, hype up and help promote the events. And I don't remember how I got my hands on one of the mix CDs, but straight up, the CD that you guys produced with Slim was my first introduction to non-hip hop music. So it was like Eurodance, some new wave. I mean, I listened to new wave occasionally, but not really, because it was more of an Orange County thing. San Diego, I grew up in San Diego, full hip hop head, nothing but hip hop.
Right.
And then my discovery of this new music that's like, would probably characterize it as Eurodance. It evolved now to EDM and trance, and there's all.
That was the start of it all.
Right. So that during that period of time was the start, and because I was intrigued and had this, like, obviously this addiction to the music, newfound love for a new genre of music that I've never heard before. I ended up, and you don't know this story, but how I met Slim was that he was performing or competing in a DJ contest in San Diego.
Wow.
So he was demonstrating something in front of some like music store. I think it was maybe a Guitar Center. And I literally came up to him as a fan. So I walked up to him, never had any DJ experience really at that time. And I asked for his phone number. So just imagine just some random kid coming up to you and going, "Hey, can I get your phone number? I really like what you're doing." So I blatantly asked him for his phone number, and he could have just blew me off or gave me a fake number or whatever. But he gave me his number, and I called him, and he's like, "Hey, why don't you come over? I'll show you some of the music." And it was just like, that's how it started. And then I ended up, having the dream of being a DJ. So it was just like, hey, it's cool. I love the music, obviously I want to learn more. So DJ Slim, he ended up being kind of as a mentor.
So before then, were you into electronics? Were you into, machines and gadgets and stuff? Were you a gearhead?
No, up until that point, I wasn't. The only thing I grew up with, and I think a lot of kids during that era grew up with, was just video games. So it was like, the Street Fighter 2 era. Remember the days?
I remember that. Yeah.
Quarters and then go to the arcade. So that consumed. In the closest thing to technology was video games for me at that time. And then I had this wild idea. I was like, okay, what if I could be the guy to do all the parties in San Diego? Like, there's a party scene you know, up in what you guys were doing, but actually I just wanted to do it for the colleges because I knew that
Right.
each college would have its own org, you know, whether it be the Vietnamese Student Association or all these other groups. And again, this is kind of like, and I wasn't really thinking of it as a true business at the time, but my thought process was I'm going to buy some speakers, some turntables, and
Wow.
then self-promote and just say, hey, I can perform at your party. It was as simple as that. And eventually it did happen. So, you know, I went up and just solicited, you know, these, I would go to the events, and then I would meet with whoever was in charge. And that's actually how I met Twee, because she was in charge of the VSA at the time at UCSD. So I met her on this mission, you know, on the way to try to secure jobs. And so I was like, hey, I'm a DJ, you know, would like to show you what we can do. And then eventually it worked because we ended up doing a lot of parties. We actually did a party where there was like a joint college thing between UCI, UCSD, and all these things. So we ended up performing for them and spinning music and getting paid for it. So it was kind of the best of both worlds. But that's how you and I crossed paths. And I had no idea at the time when I met you years later, and this is pre anything to do with film. This was just in the DJ days of introducing a new, like, you know, genre of music. And this is pre all the big festivals, right? Now it's like EDM is so mainstream. Back then it was a little bit more underground. So it was almost like there was this like exclusivity to it. There's a little bit of the culture, you know. A lot of people tell stories of going to the Asian Garden Mall to buy, you know, these like mix CDs that had all this trance music or dance music. And yeah, no, it was an interesting time. And I can segue, if you want, I can segue into that and some of my journey. Actually, you know, you earlier you were mentioning kind of like my growing up in San Diego, and that's obviously Slim and I are both from San Diego. And I remember a conversation that you and I had that actually no one ever brought up to me before, and I distinctly remember, was you basically commented and said that you and I are probably one of the oldest American-born Vietnamese, you know, guys that we've each other met. So what month were you born in? What year?
I was born in November 1975. There's one guy that beats us, is Anderson.
Oh,
he was born. Yeah, he was literally born 6 days after. You know, they were on a plane flying over from I don't know where they were in Guam or wherever they came from, flying over international waters, and right over Hawaii. They had to drop the plane, and they had him in Hawaii. So he's 8 days after April 28, 1975. And what about you? What month and year were you?
March 1976. No.
Okay, so yeah, we're like very early in the early days of you know, everybody coming.
Yeah, coming. Yeah, and literally the first wave. So so I was actually born in Palm Springs, and then my parents and eventually moved to San Diego, where I grew up. And growing up in San Diego, I mean, obviously I love it here. I'm still here. I don't think I'll ever leave. I mean, something we'll get to later, which, you know, I ended up doing a startup technology company. And there was initially, when I first formed it, there was a push to do everything in Silicon Valley up north in San Jose and, you know, Santa Clara and that world in San Francisco. And because I you know, just love San Diego, I ended up just staying here and holding down the fort, and you know, it's working out. But yeah, so growing up in San Diego is an interesting thing. My parents, you know, to their credit, they really valued education, academics, and so they went through the trouble of putting me in private school, which has its pros and cons. The pros being, you know, they wanted to shield me, quote unquote, from, you know, I guess becoming a problem child. So they put me in Catholic school. So what, you know, it's driven a little bit by religion and then also academics. But it was okay when I was like in elementary, middle school, where things got a little hairy. And I don't know if I ever mentioned this story to you, is when I started, you know, going to high school. And so they paid about, I believe like $1,000 to $2,000 a month just to put me to a Catholic school.
Wow.
A high school. And you know, I was in a small class. Everybody kind of knew everybody. No real issues that I recall at that time. But then when I first started the school is like, you know, it's pretty expensive. And And so the class of people that were at the school are different. So my parents were driving me up in a Datsun,
Yeah.
it's like some old, super old car. They're putting all their chips on the table just so I can go to
Wow.
the school. And unfortunately, I experienced for the first time bullying and racism. I was one of the few Asians in the high school at the time. So, and not only that, I was this tiny little kid. I mean, I might look, I mean, I'm already I already seem kind of young for my age. And at
Yeah.
that time, when I was a ninth grader, I looked like probably a sixth grader. It was like this, I was super small, easy to pick on. I was Asian, even though I spoke perfect English being born
Right.
here, right? But to the point where my parents had to get me a counselor at the school. So like once a week, I would go to this counselor, and the counselor would try to tell me, hey, everything's gonna be okay, and stuff like that. And I was like, dude, I'm getting bullied, like literally bullied. Like they made fun of me,
Yeah.
made fun of at that time, ninth grade freshman, I didn't have any sense of style, so I just wore whatever my parents bought me
Yeah.
from Ross or whatever the stores were at the time, JCPenney. And then so I was getting made fun of, everything, right? All the above. And I had enough. I was like, after 1 year, I made a message, and it was kind of a gangster move. And I think I might have told you this, but I told my parents, and it was very drastic at the time. Now that I reflect on it, but I told them I will fail every class unless you get me out of the school, because it was just, to me, it wasn't worth it. It wasn't worth the emotional, trauma at the time for me, especially, going through, that stage,
Yeah.
14 years old, 15 years old, and then having to deal with this extra, element. And sure enough, I started not doing any of the work, failed all my tests.
Your second year.
Sophomore year. So the sophomore year was the it. Like I gave them 1 year, and the sophomore year was when I said enough's enough. And so everyone, the whole school, like freaked out. Like the principal freaked out. He sat down with me, and he said, "What's going on?" And I said, "Look, I am experiencing racism, and I'm getting made fun of every single day here, and there's nothing that's gonna stop this from happening. I'm just one kid, in school." Yeah. So all my grades went to, it was, from A's and B's to F's. And so my parents got the hint, and they took me out. So it worked. It's unfortunate that I had to get that drastic of a message. And then, so the fear was that if I go to a public school that, there's gangs and drugs and stuff like that, which actually are valid concerns. I don't know how it was in Orange County, but during the early 90s, there were Asian gangs, and there were, house burglaries and robbing.
Home invasions. Yeah.
Home invasions. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So valid concerns. For me, I think one of the moments I'll never forget, and it's something that I think uniquely experienced, was that anytime there was like some odd name, so say like your name is like David Ho or something like that, just some last name that's kind of humorous in the English language, so all of the non-Asians would laugh at it. So I remember just sitting in the Catholic school, and anytime a unique name, whether it be Asian or something else, that would be called out by the teacher, I would hear giggles, right? And then I'll never forget this, the first day of public school, and this school had quite a bit of Asians in the class. So I'm sitting there, and they're, the teacher's going, Dat Ho, Dat Nguyen, Dat, all these, all these names, and not one
reaction.
Not one single reaction at all. And to me, that I'll never forget that. It was a weird moment in my head. And I was like, wow, I feel like, okay, I belong here. No one's looking at me weird. I feel like part of the, it's nothing. And in fact, it was unusual because everyone else, because a lot of people also during that time in the early 90s, a lot of people were also just starting to come from Vietnam. And so a lot of them actually didn't speak English, or they had to take ESL classes. So I'm like, they're getting introduced to that. And then growing up, that was my experience.
And this was in East San Diego?
Yes, in East San Diego.
East San Diego is where a lot of Asians were concentrated.
During that time, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't grow up in Orange County. I grew up in LA, but I went to high school for a little bit at a boarding school in Orange County. And I remember the amount of camaraderie, solidarity that we had with fellow Vietnamese kids. And I went to a boarding school that was predominantly all white, but there were, you know, 4 or 5 Asian kids um, that were very popular, smart kids, and they were just popular. So I didn't experience that, but I remember hearing about so many of the gangs that were happening outside of our school at the time, in Orange County, because I think at the time what happened is, you know, you get all these kids that came from Vietnam, and they were growing up and they got picked on by, you know, whatever, these white kids or Mexican kids. And they just kind of formed these bonds, and their parents were all working, and they just formed these bonds and they became really close. And they had a lot of gangs in Orange County. And I remember that we were doing Trilogy and we were promoting, and there were so many shootouts. Like at our parties, we had to really beef up security, but there were still shootings at every single one of them. For 2 years, we had to deal with the gangs. And then an interesting fact is, when ecstasy came in, all of that went away.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Really, really interesting fact. And then I think the rise of, you know, that EDC, EDM music just kind of took over, and then people just was all doing Molly. And then there were the gangs just started to really die down, and all you could see rival gangs at our parties and at the raves really start to really get along. And it was like the weirdest thing to be a part of. But going back to your experience, you know, that kind of experience shapes you to, you know, and I'm now referring back to, you know, the isolation of going to that private school,
Yeah.
right? It forced you to kind of grow into the person that you are today. I mean, it's a cliche, right? Obviously, a lot of things form us, but you know, that gangster move that you referred to, you put your foot down and you're like, you know, mom and dad, I'm not doing this. And you gave it another year. And that's like the root of some really strong initiative to say, yo, I'm not taking this. I'm going to change my life, and I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah, reflecting back on it, yeah, it was heated, you know, and you know, I'd have these like huge arguments with them, and you know, reflecting back, they had the good intentions,
Right.
absolutely, but you know, being and experiencing that level of harassment at the time was tough. I actually had a guy protect me, like when I remember being put in a headlock just for fun. The guy had me in a headlock, kind of toying around with me. He wasn't really hurting me, but
Yeah.
he had me in a headlock, and because I was so small, he could lift me up in the air, but not like choking me, but just kind of like together, like lifting me up. And then it was like a scene out of a movie, right? So it behind, and then as that was happening, my buddy who's non-white, non-Asian, and he's a white guy. He was like one of my friends from the previous, you know, school. So he went with me, and he saw what was happening, and he then put that guy in a headlock. And keep in mind, and he was like a high school wrestler, all American, you know, really nice, you know, like good looking kid. And he put that guy in a headlock. And the thing was, that guy was way bigger than him even. And then that guy put me down. And then I was like, it was cool to be rescued, but at the same time, I don't have my buddy with me every second of the day, you know. I got rescued, but man, I can't, you know, I can't hold this down. There was one moment where one guy was like just poking me from the back. I was just sitting in class, and this dude's just like poking me, right? I remember he had freckles, red hair, and everything. He's like poking me, and then I was just like, dude, you got to stop this, man. Like, you know, this is really, it's funny, but now it's getting annoying. And I literally one day just lost it. I stood up from the chair and I literally just punched him as hard as I could while he was sitting in the chair, and I walked out of the classroom, and that was it. And then I didn't get in trouble for it for whatever reason. But even so, it's like, why do I have to deal with that?
Yeah.
Like, why do I have to, you know, exert myself? You know, obviously I look like the aggressor now because I'm decking the guy in the face. A guy much bigger than me, so he could have, if he fought back, I don't know. I was just too crazy to you know, if I was gonna scrap with this 6-foot dude, you know. But anyways, but yeah, you know, it again, it's like one of those things where I reflect back on, and it's just like, wow, you know, all these different things do end up shaping you.
And there's so many levels of this like Asian American experience, right? Because like San Diego has its own sort of enclave, and you experience, you know, between a public and a private school, there's like different experiences. You know, me being in LA, I was around the predominantly Black community for the first 15 years of my, you know, the childhood home that we were in a Black city, black enclave, we each kind of like go through our own thing. And then there's a huge difference too between like kids that were born here in the mid 70s or guys that came when they were like 8 or 9. You know,
Sure.
there's a different level of processing and kind of like fitting in that you talk to a lot of these guys. You know, I got friends in their 50s now, and they talked about, you know, they didn't understand English when they first came here.
Right.
So the level of bullying, they probably didn't really absorb the words the way we did, you know,
Exactly. That's a good
getting
point.
tossed around. Yeah, it's crazy. And then my wife, she's Taiwanese. She spent many of her formative years back and forth from Taiwan to Arcadia. And so it's insulated in that part of LA where she doesn't have the kind of baggage that we do, right? Because by the time I got to high school, it was all white. My wife and Anderson are both, you know, here, and they don't have that kind of like that baggage that we do with getting picked on and bullied, clearly, you know, growing up in high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
So not all Asian American experience with bully is the same.
Right. It's different.
It's
Yeah.
different. Yeah, because I didn't get bullied by white guys by the time I got to high school. I got bullied by black kids when I was younger. So by the time I got bullied by white kids, I was just like, this ain't shit. You know? This ain't shit. You know, it's like it's just a different kind of, but it's all still where you're getting disrespected, and it's just, you have to find a way to deal with it, and it sucked, man, going through it at the time.
Yeah. Right. I mean, and
Sucked.
yeah, and it's yeah, it's just I think that you know, I was always kind of I guess that's like, you know, without even realizing it at the time, because when I told you this story, I remember telling you that story, you actually referred to it as a gangster move, and at that time I didn't even think of it that way. I didn't think of it as a power move at all. I just thought of it as like, hey, this is you know,
Desperate times calls for desperate measures.
this is it. I don't know like what anybody else would do,
Yeah.
but like I was like, you know what? I'm just, you know, I'm just not having it. I don't think it, like, imagine just sitting there and just failing everything, just F all across the board.
Damn.
It's like, you know, and I did it. I was like, you know what? I had enough of this. But, and then, so the transition into the high school was like the most amazing thing. It was like, it made me like,
Wow.
just appreciate, you know, the culture pot, you know, it appreciate, you know, being around. I could hear, and then, you know, they actually made fun of my Vietnamese because my Vietnamese at the time wasn't good at all.
And you're like, bring it on.
Yeah,
At that point, you're like,
yeah. I mean, well, the thing was, I was trying to, you know, they just
yeah.
looked at me and laughed at how I spoke Vietnamese when I would speak Vietnamese with the ones that just came over, and they're still my friends today. I mean,
Wow.
I have
Wow.
some. I remember one guy that was just so into being my friend because he literally just came from Vietnam at that
Wow.
moment when he dropped into the school, and yeah, no, and then, you know, over time you see them involved. They're in ESL classes and stuff like that, but it was an interesting time, you know, gangs, home invasions, crazy, you know, things that happen. And I was a nerdy kid, you know. I wasn't in the I didn't have the capacity to really
fuck shit up. Yeah.
I think maybe because I didn't need to at
Yeah.
the time, you know. I mean, you know, my parents are okay. I mean, they're able to, you know, somehow fork out the money for me to go to school, private school. So I wasn't from that survival mode as much.
Yeah.
For me, it was more like, I wasn't, you know, I wasn't as academic. I did pick up an Asian sport, which is badminton. So I ended up being able to, I won like top high school, like, you know, in the region. So like I had that to drive me, and just getting that social thing. Cause, you know, I was put in football in my freshman year, and I was just, imagine this little tiny kid that was terrified every time the ball came to me. I was just like afraid for my life. So it didn't fit me. And then it was a 180 to then do a sport that was predominantly Asian, that actually had, you know, it was a high school sport. We actually went to other high schools, got to meet a bunch of people, and then that evolved. And I think this would be a good segue to kind of give you a transition to how like that ended up being, going into, you know, there's this huge gap between, for me, high school to film, and it's a huge, gosh, I want to say almost 10 to 15 year journey to that point. Actually, 10-year journey to get to that point. So after I, got out of high school, I just went, did my college thing. Parents are super academic. I had no exposure to business, zero exposure to film at that time. So I just went the track. I actually got into law school. I wasn't cut out to be a doctor like my parents wanted me to do. And how that ended up happening was that I did an EMT course so I could get my feet wet in the medical industry. So I felt like, okay, if I can do this EMT certification, I can get my feet wet and get this real world, experience in the medical field. And so I ended up getting certified as an EMT and did my first ride-alongs. And wow. I was more sick than the patient that we were picking up because I couldn't handle all of the rides from the back. And then the environment wasn't for me. So I quickly knew that the medical field wasn't for me. So I pivoted midway through my early college days and got into law school.
Wait, you took the LSAT and the whole nine?
LSAT, got into law school, yeah.
Well,
took the LSAT.
Which law school did you get into?
So I got into Thomas Jefferson. It's like one of the mid to lower tier law schools, not super fancy, but
did you go
in San Diego? Yeah. So I went a year. So how that all transpired was that while I'm on this like DJing adventure, and so this is still the same era as our mutual friend Slim. And it started to blow up. The thing that blew up the scene for us at the time without us realizing it was Napster. Napster was this way to have the music distribute beyond just the shop, inside, Philippa in the Asian Garden Mall. To get it out of there, it was Napster. And none of us knew this. None of us realized this. But all of the songs and the mixes that we were sharing and doing these mix CDs were being shared on Napster. So suddenly this thing is propagating outside of Southern California. So one of the crazy stories, and this was all at the same time I'm doing law school. So this is all happening in parallel.
Yeah.
So I get one random call. So I had put, I don't know if you remember, do you remember the websites called members.tripod something?
No.
Something tripod? Oh, okay. So back then to put up a website, you had to use these like different portals. It wasn't like anything like today. And I would leave my contact and everything on this. And this is early days. We're talking like what, 96, 97 when the internet's barely alive. Yeah, barely there. And so I get this random call from a guy in Denver, and he said, "Hey, I want to book you. I want to fly you out to Denver." And so I'm like, okay, Denver. I was like, what on earth's in Denver? Like, and keep in mind, I'm this kid who's never left San Diego. I've gone to LA, but never left San Diego, California, anything. And then I thought it was a hoax, to be honest. I thought it was like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, so at the time I'm like DJing and happy to make a few $100s doing these, college parties. And because to me, the math worked out. It's like, here I am doing something I love and I'm making a few $100s on it compared to where I was busting my butt working in catering or something, doing random jobs and making the same amount of money, but working, night and day. And so for me, it was a win-win to be able to do something I loved and make money.
Paid for it.
So at the time I was happy making a couple $100, right? But because I thought this was so ridiculous, I decided to do a number that was so outrageous, the guy would say no. So then I said $2,000.
Holy shit.
$2,000. So I just told him straight up, and he flew me out. he said done, and then so he got a plane ticket. We're talking like limo picked me up, the hotel, the whole 9 yards. So I got, for a brief moment in time during that period, I got to live kind of what it was, to feel what it was like to be,
a DJ,
traveling musician, somewhat of a known person. I don't want to say celebrity, but it's something known about. And yeah, so there I was.
Wait, you took music and you mixed it together, right?
Yeah, just Slim. So what we do is that because this music at that time didn't exist in streaming form at all, you had to buy the records. Yeah. And then you had to source these records from Europe. And so there's only a few channels to get this music. Yeah. And so then you had to curate it, right? So you had to have a good eye, a good ear, and so designating which songs that you think will resonate. So I just went with what I liked. So, hey, I like this song, I like this song. So what we would do is compile the songs together. I didn't start producing my own music till later. Early on, it was just mixing existing songs.
And it was turntable mixing, right? Like analog, you're just getting the beat down and mix and matching the beats and scratching.
Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't anything digital where, you know, you
No.
can match up things on
Right. You don't
graphs.
click
Yeah.
buttons and it
Yeah.
automatically, matches
It's a
tempo.
very hard thing. It's like a very hard thing
Yeah,
to
back then
do.
it was an art. I wasn't, I mean, I was okay at it. I mean, I was more, I think my skill set was more identifying good music to string together. And my DJ skills were still inferior to somebody like Slim. I mean,
Yeah. He was amazing. Yeah.
yeah, he's amazing live. And, so the story to bring, pay it forward, right? So because Slim was the guy who taught me everything,
You brought him
I
out?
him with me to that event. I wish
Oh
I could
man.
find the footage of it because it was epic. So when we flew in, right, it was snowing. I almost, first of all, I almost missed the plane. I mean, I was an idiot. I didn't know how it all works. I never flew before. And we almost missed the plane. We get in. I remember just crazy turbulence because you're flying into Denver and it's a lot of snow. So I fly in and it's snowing. So in my mind, I'm going like, man, and my expectations were super low. I was thinking like, who on earth would know me in Denver? There's like, there's no way that I just like, first of all, I'm getting paid good money. So I'm just going to see how this goes. So my expectations are very low. And so we came out and then people started trickling in and then And then before we know it, the producer comes up to me and and he's like, hey, the promoter, actually, not producer, promoter came up to me. He's like, we sold out. And I was like, wow. And then the whole thing was packed. Room like there's no room to stand.
Was it a Vietnamese thing or Asian thing?
It was a mix. You know what? It was a mix. It was like 75% Asian and 25% non-Asian, which was a trip, right? Because you have outside the bubble of our Orange County, you have no idea that the other Asian pockets existed at all, right? And so it's like all of the, and then I'll never forget because it gave me chills even at the time. But so Slim's rocking it, right? So he's the one just.
Did they know that he was coming out? Did you tell the promoter?
Oh, I mean, we're on the flyers together, yeah. So I don't know how many people knew Slim, to be honest, at that time.
Yeah.
Outside of, for some reason they picked up mine, but I'm not sure how many people knew him. But so I flew him out, and he's rocking. He's a veteran. He's already, by the way, by this time he's already done I don't know how many of your parties, right? So he's the veteran, just throwing down, right? And I'll never forget, it just he's doing it, and then the transition happened where I'm taking over. So he's doing his thing, and then I come over, and then they go all the way from Southern, California, San Diego, put your hands up, and then so they just shout me out, and then everyone went nuts, and I'm like, oh my God, and then just focused on the record. I was all business, dude. I had no. It was my first time in such a huge crowd. It was thousands of people. Like I'm used to like these little, school parties, right? At the colleges. And so it just like that moment I'll never forget and then I was just more like, okay, I can't screw this up. Like I'm on point. I got to perform here. So it wasn't until later I felt comfortable enough to like get the crowd going, like all these DJs do now. Right. Yeah. But yeah, so keep in mind, this was Denver, and you'll be fascinated to know that this then spread out to
oh my God,
Louisiana. I took Slim with me to Louisiana.
I had no idea, man.
Yeah, and then the biggest other scene was Columbus, Ohio. We went there like 5 times.
You got to be kidding me.
Yeah. So Slim and I actually ended up getting Epic over too, DJ Epic.
Yeah, I remember him.
Over to Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. So they had a scene too. It was insane. And then we ended up looping back. We did this one tour where we went to Atlanta, we went to Louisiana, and then Minnesota. I mean, it was insane. Like you would think like these, and then all of them had these Asian pockets of events. And then
then did you gradually start charging more? You're like, well,
I mean, I don't vividly remember, but I was totally happy making a couple grand,
Yeah.
So now that's kind of segue into my whole school experience. So eventually the Denver promoter, he was doing so well. He said, hey, do you want to do a residency? So keep in mind, I'm in San Diego doing a residency in another state, it's gangster, right? So the residency was to perform every Thursday. So I was guaranteed money. I just had to hop on a plane. But there's one problem. I'm in law school, man. I'm full-time law school. So I literally have class on Friday morning. So the crazy thing I did was I performed Thursday night in Denver, fly out, earliest flight in Denver, land at the San Diego airport, and the law school was right across from the airport. So literally I land, you know, whatever, 7 o'clock, and then make my way to class at 8 a.m. So suffice to say, I couldn't maintain that for long, man. Cause it
How
was
long
like,
did you do that for?
I mean, it was like, so I ended up dropping out of law school. I couldn't handle, I dropped out of law school. It's a combination of things. My performance wasn't good, great. If you're going to law school, you really
You
got
got
to
to be in it. Yeah.
be into it. You got to, and your heart has to be into it. My
Yeah.
heart was never into it. It was more like, to be honest, it was a status thing. Like, hey, oh, it'd be cool to be a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
I had enough chops to get in. It wasn't my passion. It wasn't. It's just like I was too, you know, obviously distracted, right? You know, because I had this other career
Right.
going. And so I honestly, I ended up dropping out. It was tough because, you know, I ended up owing like 20 grand, you know, because it's like, dude, I dropped out of law school that first year. It's not free. So I had to, you know, and I couldn't juggle it. Like I was too crazy. I was like, I was nuts for thinking I could do it, you know, like, oh yeah, I'm going to be this like DJ that's going to go fly around the States and go to law school at the same time. No, there's no way that was going to work.
So when you started DJing in Denver, how long did that go on for? And then what was the span of that time? You know, you started traveling more for DJing?
Yeah, so it was a few years. It was like from 99 to 2001 or two. I mean, I ended up even getting, you know, I started dabbling into producing music. I got a record deal with a German label, music label. So I started doing that. But here's kind of where I got burned out from it because essentially the parties that I was doing, people started overdosing, you know, to your point, you know, some of the drug usage, and then people are starting like, you know, literally
dropping
at the events that we were doing. And nobody remembers this because this dates back in like, you know, 2000. So what now? Freaking
20 years. Yeah.
20 years ago. Oh my God. So 20 years ago, they somehow the UCSD student body convinced whoever was in charge to do giant rave events at the college, right? And I remember it was insane. Like it was like just imagine EDC but at a college, right?
Yeah.
Anyways, they put a kibosh on that because people were like dropping.
Dying. Yeah.
They were like,
dude, they were doing drugs that people didn't even know like existed. There were names out there that it was just brand new designer drugs on the scene, and people were literally getting carried out. I mean,
right, on stretchers. Like, I mean, it was so when, and then at the time they were the FBI was cracking down on the, you know, raves, you know, the underground raves and all that stuff. So it's just that period of time where I felt like, man, you know, is this, you know, and this is, keep in mind, this is pre, like, you know, all these, like, I don't even know who would be an example of it, but like the DJ Tiestos of the world.
Yeah,
they were DJing at the time, but I'm talking about the superstars breakouts now.
Yeah,
you know?
it's pre-EDC, pre-EDC, Electric Daisy Carnival, yeah.
So at that time in my mind, I was like, okay, let me try to do the mature decision and try to do quote unquote a more traditional career. And so I started transitioning out of that because it's like, it's getting a little burnt out from the scene, and, you know, and then the drug usage, and uniquely, you know, a lot of people would assume that because I'm a DJ, I'd, you know, dabble in any of that. But the crazy thing is like, I never tried any of the drugs. And it's not because I'm against it or, you know, or just like too good for it. It was just, I was already getting the high off the music. You know, the music was already my dopamine release. It's like, okay, the music was it. So I fortunately, you know, never dove into that. And I just witnessed people around me. I remember seeing a guy who's a friend of mine, and for some reason, I don't know what he took, and then his mind was gone, like literally gone. Like, you know, he's there, but he's not there. So stuff like that just kind of added to it. And then, so this kind of segues in that, you know, I talked to my parents. My parents were like, you know what, you should do this social work program. So this is totally ultra random, right? So I'm like, okay, you know, I'll just go back to school and get a master's now. So I go back to school, you know, and get a master's degree. And
in what?
It's called a Master's of Social Work. So it's
So wait, what did you get your undergrad in?
My undergrad was in sociology, and
okay.
and also with the social, you know, social work. So you
were kind of like inching along that kind of path.
I inched along, not on purpose, but I needed a degree that I was comfortable with doing to get into law school. So it was definitely not my passion. It would the underlying, it was a mixture of psychology. I switched from bio to psychology to all these different areas. But it was always with the goal of either getting into a law school or a med school at the time. And fortunately, I did enough to get into law school. And then since then, the reason why it circles back was because my mom is a social worker.
Got it.
She's like, hey, why don't you just do this? I'm doing it. So when I saw the day-to-day stuff my mom was doing, I was like, okay, if she can do it, I could do it. Whatever. Let's just do it.
Chill. Yeah.
Yeah. I figured, whatever, what the heck, let's just, well, I'll just go back to school and do a traditional, 9-to-5 thing. And it's partly my fault. The reality hit that once the school was a breeze, got my master's degree, and I was in this program that paid for the degree, but the catch was you'd have to work for the county, and this division is called Child Protective Services. And in my mind, I was thinking more along the lines of it'd be like something more like on the counseling side or working with families and stuff like that. So I'm like, yeah, whatever, let's do it. But it was much more than that. And honestly, like, I'm like, it was a shock to me once I got my feet wet and took my first job, with the county. And it was quite traumatic for me.
What made it traumatic? What was the shock?
The shock was, the reality was, you're helping families, but now there's different divisions and categories in the field. And one of them being is that when, say, a kid shows up at school with some bruises, the teacher will have to make a report, right, in case they're being physically abused. And then now my job was to go and investigate.
Wow. It's heavy.
It's super heavy. I wasn't cut out for it, and which is why I quickly transitioned out. But my job was then to go in and identify whether or not there's actual abuse occurring, whether or not it's an accident or is it on purpose. So you're stuck interviewing a kid who's going to protect his family. Like, the kid's not going to say straight up, yeah, my mom hit me upside the head. See, the kid's not going to say that. So you have to have these interviewing skills to not lead kids on too. It's like, for example, if you go, did your mom hit you? And you just subtly nod your head, you're like giving them and then sometimes they might go, yes, and it's not the real answer. And here's the problem. When you take a kid away, abused or not, you're destroying the family in some way. It's like but again, it's obviously the parents' fault too, if that's the case. But at the end of the day, you're causing this like disruption in the family, which there's, for the most part, there's situations where the kid is better off being protected, right? What if the kid's being sexually abused, right? You got to take the kid out. You can't leave the kid in there, as much as they want to stay in, you can't. But then they go through this crazy system of, living in group homes, being torn.
Foster care.
They give opportunities for parents to reunite, of course. But again, it's this thing that I just was never fully aware of until I actually did it. And I wasn't cut out for it because.
How long did you do it for?
So I did it for 2 years. I did my commitment. So the deal was, they would pay for your degree. And that's the only reason why, that was the main reason why I was like, you know what? I already had the sting of paying 20 grand for
law school. Yeah.
Law school. I wasn't about to get into more student debt. So that wasn't my thing. And so part of the play was like, okay, you're telling me I get to go to school, you're going to pay for my master's degree, and I get a job. That sounds like a win-win, but obviously, after I found out what was involved, I was like, okay, they obviously created this program to get more people to do the job, right? Because otherwise, who the heck's going to do this? So much respect to all the social workers. And I have a lot of social workers who are really good friends with me to this day that I keep in touch with. And hats off to them for being able to do what they do. I just wasn't cut out for it. So I did it. I transitioned though. So again, I guess this kind of creates this pattern, right? So I'm in the situation I don't want to be in, right? just like I was in high school. So one day I actually realized in day one that I wasn't cut out for this. So it was unfortunate to realize it after you've done through a whole freaking degree, right? Whatever. So but at the same time, it's like fulfilling, okay, I told my mom and dad, I did what you wanted me to do here. I got to do, master's degree and something. And, I have a quote unquote regular normal job, not out DJing, and so I did that, and then in my mind, I was like, you know what, I need to do something different. So then I called the guy who used to design my mix CDs. You know, all
Wow.
the artwork you
Yeah.
needed. You know, all this artwork. So I called him up, and I remember him doing something with websites. So I said, okay, I told him my situation. I said, honest to God, right now, I am miserable with my job, and I want you to tell me exactly the truth, no beating around the bush, no sugarcoating. Tell me how hard your job is right now as a web guy. He's a website master, whatever you want to call it at the time. He goes, well, what I do is they send me some photos and I put it up in their store and they sell some products. And that's it. I was like, your kid, I was like, are you sure? Like, don't beat around the bush because this has happened to me once. I'm like doing the social worker thing and it ain't working out. So I want to know I want to know the dirt, right? Like, oh, is this like, oh, crazy, you know, oh my God, I'm stressed out kind of thing.
Yeah.
He's like, no, that's all I do. You know, he's like, that's all. So I'm like, okay, done, dude. I'm going to get into because at the time also I felt like, okay, I remember doing a DJing page for me, right? So
Yeah.
it's an advertisement vehicle. So what better way to get things going than to do to
For
get into
yourself.
the website.
Yeah.
So I did it for myself really too. So then I immediately started seeking out you know, programs where I could be a website designer. So this led me to film, but film was not even on my radar. It was websites only. So I started, so I went to the community college pamphlet and it's all something web, JavaScript. I'm all, sign me up. So I signed myself up for a night class, you know, so I can do my work at the day, at nighttime, drive to the community college and then get some, you know, get my feet wet. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just going to take this first web class. And then, so I go there and there was only 2 people in the class. And then the lady comes out and says, I have some bad news for you guys. There's not enough people in this class. So we're going to cancel it. So I'm going like, oh my God, like my only way out of this. Yeah. And it's like, this thing's canceled. So the person in front of me turned around and just said, hey, have you heard of this digital program over at UCSD that they do? And I'm like, no, tell me more about this. And then so he gave me the info. And again, this is random, right? This could have been anybody. What if I wasn't even this class guy just turned around out of nowhere and just told me this information? So of course I looked it up, and then I attended their little info session. And of course, the biggest thing for me was like, I work full time. I need a night program. So I raised my hand. I said, will you guys at some point have a night program? Or do you guys even have a night program? They're all, sorry, we don't. So then of course I go home completely rejected. And I'm just like, oh God, you know, okay, social work it is for now until I figure out the next semester or something, right? And then a week later, I get a phone call because I gave them my information. They're all, you know what? We have great news because we have a lot of applicants like yourselves who are working and want to do the program. We are, for the first time ever, going to do a night program for working individuals like yourself that goes from like 7 to 10 every night, right? And so I was like, oh my God, this is it. You know, this is the deal here. So yeah, I signed up for the program. So my life was, and another part that I didn't mention earlier was that because during that time, for whatever reason, economically, they actually had no positions for me in San Diego. And so when they said, look, we don't have any jobs in San Diego, you're going to have to look elsewhere because, you know, now I owe them my work commitment, you know, so they still pay me a full salary, but as a worker, they go, if it's not available, you know, the fine print, if it's not available in San Diego, you're going to have to ship out. And so I had my colleagues who went to school with me going to Sacramento, going to all these different places. I'm like, hell no, I am not going to go to Sacramento. I'd rather pay back the money, you know, than to go to some other place that, you know, I don't want to be. Anyways, they had an opening in Orange County. And so I took it, and it was by luck because I like, you know, pushed off for as long as I could. And then finally they opened in Orange County. So there I was leaving San Diego and commuting, because at that time I didn't want to move out of San Diego. I'd rather just commute and do the crazy whatever 2-hour trip it would be. So I'd wake up at 4 a.m, and I wanted to get to work at 6 so I could get off earlier. So I got to the office at 6 and to avoid all the traffic, right?
Yeah.
And the exit was right off of the Disneyland exit, you know, off of Catella or something around there. So there I am every morning. But keep in mind, so at 5 p.m., I'm leaving social work in Catella and
Crazy.
driving and battling traffic. So traffic at 4 or 5 p.m. down to San Diego is just like the worst and the worst, the worst, right? So I'm driving all the way back to make it to the class at 7. And then that lasted. So that was my day, but you know what? It was light at the end of the tunnel, and the thing about the program is this. I thought it was like, I was just focused on websites. And then the program was like, you're going to learn websites, you're going to learn Photoshop, you're going to learn video editing, you're going to learn all these things. And so I only wanted to learn one thing, but I said, sure.
And that's where sort of like your life changed, like that, at that point, at that point where things transition and you didn't even plan it. I mean, all these things happen to us serendipitously, and we just don't even realize like these things are changing us on a very deep level, and changes the path of where we're going to be in our life.
Right. And so at that moment, what ended up happening was I'm learning all these skills. So now, back then, I used to have a guy design CDs for me. Now I'm actually getting my feet wet in Photoshop. And the first day of class they went, hey, first day of class, here's a MacBook Pro. Here's a Photoshop license. Here's a DSLR. It was like the first time they had a DSLR. And I'm like, dude, for the first time, I'm loving school. Like it was the light at the end of the tunnel. Like normally, and all this time I'm in school and didn't care, like, cause it's just like, oh, I gotta study, I gotta do the test. No, this was like, I'm all in, right? I'm like, this is exciting. And the way I look at it is this is kind of an interesting. Imagine if you just grew up on a farm and yet you had this ability to be the next greatest pianist or piano player or basketball player, but then you're stuck on this farm, right? And your parents don't know any better because they're just farmers. And then you have this kind of desire or this passion for a certain thing, you just never get exposed to it. So because my parents were so like academic focused, I had no way I could fathom getting into film. It was so far away from what I was exposed to at all, right? No film experience at all. But I always had it. We all grow up loving watching movies, right? We watched like Jurassic Park growing up, Terminator 2, in the 90s, like all these movies that you grow up watching. Does it ever cross your mind you're going to be able to
do it? Yeah.
that? No, it didn't at all, right? And so what changed everything was that for my class graduate, completing the 2-year program, it was part of it was like to do a video. So some people did like a little like corporate video to sell a product, something like that. And I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna. There's this one rapper guy that Slim was working with named Ty. He's he still does this thing. He did a track with Suboy, stuff like that.
I remember Ty.
Yeah.
At the time,
he did for all the Vietnamese people that might be watching this, but he did Vietnamese Gang, that song, which was pretty like the first like Vietnamese rap song I ever heard back in the day. But anyway, so I connected with him through Slim, and I said, look, like for my project, I just want to do a music video, so I might as well, let's just get together. So I did a music video with him, and that was my project. And actually, this is Slim told me this as well, and some of the classmates at the school, because I didn't know if I have a knack for getting into video. And Slim said, hey, you did okay with music, but honestly, I think you have a knack for video stuff. Like you should probably take this seriously. He told me that just as a side comment, not even sitting me down. He was just like off the cuff, just mentioned it to me. And I said, you know what? I really like this video thing, So then that was the pivot point of me kind of getting into the digital realm. And at that moment in time, in 2005, they didn't have, and how I got into the red thing, because that was one of the things you were wondering about before when we talked. At the time, digital video was very new, and digital video, if I can give you an analogy, when you take a digital still, at the time you could take digital pictures. Just imagine a picture is like a giant piece of paper, right? A big poster.
Yeah.
That's the size of the image,
right.
And when you take a still, you can take a giant poster size image. But at the time to record digital video, it was literally a postage stamp size, 1920 by 1080. So imagine, or even 720p. Yeah. Imagine taking a 720p, 1280 by 720p image and printing that out and what that would look like. It was a postage stamp compared to what a real film right. image would look like. And so at that time, so there I was in class and juggling social work, at nighttime, about to, graduate. And then I started getting into the digital thing. And so Panasonic made this digital camera, and they were at the time using crazy adapters just to get the film look.
Mm-hmm.
And then I actually had just acquired a 720p camera, which was considered HD at the time by
Cutting edge, yeah.
Yeah, it was considered cutting edge at the time. And it was the first time where we're recording digitally too. So we record the digital media. Right now, that's like commonplace. Everybody, you know, it's been done forever. But at that time, we were still filming on little mini DV tapes, you know. And I remember my instructor even telling me, like, "Are you going to trust a hard drive over a
tape?
A tape? Tape's way more reliable, right?" And then we all know what happened. So while I'm in class, I started. I attended, again, this is the same kind of deja vu moment that I had when I signed up for my community college class. So here I am, signed up for a boot camp to learn more about how to shoot HD with this new 720p HD Panasonic camera. So I'm at this boot camp, and I'm excited to learn how to shoot HD. And my desire was, like, I would see all these films on QuickTime trailers, and I would say, how can I get there? Like, what I'm filming right now doesn't look anywhere near like what these big movies are doing. You know, I want to know how to get there. So the stepping stone was to get this HD camera, which I thought at the time would get me there. So I'm in this boot camp, and this guy again turns around and talks to me, and he says, "Hey, have you ever heard of the Red camera?" And I'm like, "Bro, I just paid $200 to attend this boot camp to learn about this new camera I just bought, and you're telling me that there's something else?" You know, it's like, and so I started reading about it, and then when I found out that this guy, you know, from Oakley is doing a 4K camera. I mean, now we can shoot 4K on our phones, right? Yeah. Like, but in 2005,
unheard of.
Nobody knew what 4K was, and so at that moment in time, you know, I was stuck in class. They had a trade show, and the camera came alive. Like, they showed it. They showed Peter Jackson shooting a movie with it, and Peter Jackson was just writing off his huge, like, Hobbit, you know, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, right? And so they were taking reservations for $1,000. So, and
how much was the camera at the time? The basic model.
All in, it was 30 grand. I mean, the crazy story about it is I had no plan or way to pay for this thing. It was just like, so I just said, you know what? I think it wouldn't hurt just to get our reservation in. And through a buddy of mine, you know, hooked me up. And so we got a reservation in, and then we waited and waited. It took a bit of time for the camera to, you know, to actually release, but we saw moments of it. Mm-hmm.
Can we go back to Ty shooting that video? Okay. Yeah. So when you shoot the video with Ty, how did that quality come out? And, you know, for Slim to make a comment like that, I mean, it had to turn out pretty well, but mm-hmm. I mean, how did it look?
So I submitted the film to the San Diego Asian Film Festival as a short. And I think that's when I crossed paths with Jenny. I think that's like one of the first times. I think Jenny had maybe something to do with that, if I recall. I have to look back at my timelines, but I submitted it and it got in. So it's kind of cool to get something into a festival of some sort. But I was using at the time the 720p camera I was telling you about, the Panasonic. Yeah. It's called the HVX 200. And I shot it with that. And, you know,
it was a tape. It was a mini DV, you said?
No, it was the first time it recorded to digital media.
Sorry.
Yeah. It was the first, like, it was right at that moment where it transitioned. So I was.
How did it look?
You know, it's online. I was happy with it at the time. I mean, obviously looking back now, but the thing was that at the time, what I did was I was building like dollies. So I would get a piece of plywood, put skate wheels under it, literally get PVC pipe just to get moving shots. So I went through the trouble of just, you know, DIY, hacking together different things. And yeah, no, it was cool. Like one of these days, I'll show you the link.
And what about like lighting? Did you figure that out, or?
Yeah. So that's the other thing too, is that I didn't have any knowledge of lighting, because the class was to teach us like just how to use the equipment. But in terms of cinematography, it wasn't a film school. It was more like, we teach you all these tools. And so one of the ways that we lit one of the scenes was at a park, and I had the skateboard dolly and literally just parked my car and just shot the headlights at Ty. You know, there's a scene, and then so basically I'm like dollying in and out as he's rapping, and then and it was a little sketchy because we're in the middle at nighttime, probably 9 or 10, shooting, and like, Ty's a rapper, you know, so he's in, you know, the outfit of a rapper, and a cop came by, you know, during those times, thank God it was okay, because the cop came by, looked at us, saw what we were doing, and then just left. So,
Yeah.
so that was interesting. But yeah, it was definitely, you know, an indie effort, you know, to put it together. But it was fun because I was like, it allowed me to do something I was super, you know, into, kind of a merger of music,
Yeah.
you know, kind of thing. But yeah.
It all came together at that point. Now, with 30 grand for a camera, did you think that, okay, let me buy this? I mean, did you have a plan? 30
Okay,
grand at that time is a lot of money for
a
somebody.
huge amount of money. I didn't have the resources to get it. I had to
What were you thinking that you would buy a $30,000 camera for?
Yeah, it had to go in steps. So one thing was the idea was that I wanted to be like the next Spielberg, right? I mean, I'm not saying I'm gonna be the next Spielberg, but in my mind, I was like, I want to be this director. And so what better way to do it than to use this camera that's going to give me that film quality, which it does deliver on. And then so at the time I was thinking, you know, I'll figure it out if this thing really happens, like this camera really comes out, because a lot of people were thinking it's vaporware and like that'll never see the light of day. And then when it finally did was that a colleague of mine, and he's actually part of the technology company I'm doing now. His name's Blair. He actually was the 19th person in the world to get it, so he's ahead of me. I was 102. So basically, my serial was I was the 100th person pretty much to have the camera in the world. And interesting story I should share about that too. But so I go with him. And then come the day that the camera did come out, it was kind of interesting because we got the call. And what ended up happening was I actually got a job already with the camera. And what ended up happening was that because nobody believed this camera would ever come out and nobody knew that there would be any demand, the moment that Peter Jackson did a short film shot with it and that everyone got to see and just go, oh my God, this really delivers on what they were promising. There was a huge demand for the camera, and I was unaware. I wasn't, and this is a pivotal moment because I didn't get the camera to do a business. I got the camera to be a filmmaker. I didn't get the camera to do, you know, the last thing on my mind was that I was gonna like even lend this camera or even rent it out. That concept didn't exist. It was like, okay, this is my baby. We're gonna shoot movies with this thing. That's all we're gonna do. So what ended up happening was, and this is an interesting story too, is that when Red first came out, they were meeting with all of the big outfits that are accustomed to renting out big film equipment.
Right.
And they were initially rejected because they're like, their business model was, we're gonna rent you a camera for $100,000 a month or $150,000 a month to do a giant movie. So this is like studio work. This is not like for indie films. Right. Like this is the Hollywood business model. And so Red was trying to democratize it. So instead of you having to rent this thing, you can own it, you know, for a certain amount. It wasn't cheap, but relative compared to what it was before, it was as you know, a revolutionary shift. And so this met, as you would imagine, a lot of resistance in the beginning. So all the directors need to go to these rental houses to get these cameras that they're accustomed to. And by the time the camera finally came out, Steven Soderbergh's using it. And so a huge instant demand happened. And without us knowing it, I actually secured a job in November. I didn't get my Red camera until December 2007. And my colleague got his in September of 2007. And I actually, through another colleague, we secured the first independent feature film that was shot in North Carolina, used the Red camera. So then, so I secured the gig along with a buddy of mine. And I was expected to take delivery at the time the movie was going to start, which was around October, November. So to answer your question, we were going to be able to potentially pay off a significant portion for this camera up until that point, you know. So then, unfortunately for me, my camera didn't come in time. So my colleague got to reap the benefits. So his camera paid off in one job, you know?
Wow.
So he, you know, all the costs were taken care of because the film, you know, you rent it for 6 or 8 weeks and it paid for itself. So then, you know, by the time my camera then started coming around, I knew that, okay, you know, obviously then what ended up happening was, my parents wanted to have nothing to do with it. So they were like, first of all, I should step back a bit. When I started going to film, they were unfortunately not supportive of the.
They flipped out, right?
Yeah, it was like they just no support. They were just not interested in it. They wanted me to just stay in the lane of working a 9-to-5 job, more stable. The idea of doing film was just so outside of the scope. They were just not interested in it. But I still had support from my family members, my uncle and my aunt still supported me on this endeavor. So
where were you and Twee at the time?
I'm sorry.
Timeline. You and your wife at the time. Were you guys dating?
Yeah, so at the so I had met Twee during the early DJ days in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
And so fast forward to like 2005, so we've been together since 1999. So we've been together all that time, and she fortunately she's obviously been a rock star and supporting all my crazy ideas. Yeah. So she knew me as the lawyer. She met me as the lawyer DJ. That's what she met me as. Then I became the lawyer dropout. Then I became social worker, and no harm, no foul, but like I went from lawyer to DJing to quitting all that to being a social worker, 9-to-5 job, still super supportive, by my side through the thick and thin, was there for me. I mean, with like, she would come up with me on Fridays where she was off. She would literally sit in the car with me so I could go carpool up to make it up to my work in Catella. So she'll sit in carpool with me so I can just shoot on up on a Friday and just stay waiting for me all day while I'm doing my work. And then she'd drive home with me on Friday. I mean, that's like, you're thick and thin. So then my parents, so actually what happened was my parents wanted to, initially said, hey, they're going to help me out. Cause I told them about my idea of getting this camera and everything. So, but by the time it actually happened, they didn't want to help me on that. And then my aunts and my uncles, helped. And then her mom, and I'm just dating Twee at the time. I'm just the boyfriend. Her mom got out, and she works in the nail shop. She's a nail salonist. So she got out this box with like $5,000 in bills. And then she believed in me, and to this day still, supported me all along the way. So she got out this box and literally gave me like $5,000 or $6,000. I put, credit cards together. So basically accumulated all the resources to at least get this thing, so that I can, take it home. And then I think an interesting segue to that. So we finally get, the camera finally comes. Somehow I pull off the resources to bring this camera home. And then one day I get this opportunity to, through another colleague, I get this opportunity that Dustin Nguyen, wanted to check out, the camera. And it's kind of funny, actually, was talking to Dustin just the other day. He's actually very pivotal in this journey. So there I was, getting this call, and I remember Dustin growing up, in the 80s, watching 21 Jump Street, and he's on a number of shows. So actually I was, fanboying about the idea of being able to meet him. And there I was. So I bring this camera, this red camera. Word on the street was that I had the camera. And at the time, Dustin was preparing for a few projects, and one of them was a script that he wrote. So he wanted to see this camera, and he wanted it vetted out by his cinematographer, DP, his team. So I went to his house. I brought this camera. It was like around, January 2008, I want to say. And then I brought the camera over, and I got to meet a gentleman named Dominic Pereira, who I just talked to yesterday. And anyway, so there I was bringing this camera. And keep in mind, like I come from using an HD camera, and then this is like real world, like film camera. And so Dominic was asking me questions I had no idea how to answer. He's like asking me, what lookup tables does this camera use? And I didn't even know what a lookup table was. Anyway, so fast forward, this was the pivotal moment and life-changing. Dustin turns to me and says, hey, do you want to go to Vietnam? And I'm like,
had you been to Vietnam before then?
Never been out of the country in my life, right? And this was on a Friday or something like that. And keep in mind, I'm working full time at the county. Still. And this is the moment I'm still doing that. And then so I had to create a creative way to be gone for a week, and did that. And the next thing I know, I'm on a plane to Vietnam, and just by sheer luck too, is that I happened randomly to get my passport 3 months earlier, because of another possible job with the Red that I was going to go out with on my, my buddy's camera. And so I had gotten this passport for a job that didn't really happen. I was going to fly out of the country. So I happened to have a passport. So without the passport, I don't think this opportunity would have existed. So then I flew to Vietnam. And then so when I landed in Vietnam, unbeknownst to me, the entire film community descended onto this one commercial that Dustin was shooting. And so it was a commercial, I believe, for Tide detergent, I think it was. And there I met Johnny, G Win. I believe Charlie was there too. And then I met Qua. And so that's how I met everybody, was just this one film commercial.
So this one film commercial, does everybody call everybody and like, yo, this kid brought over this camera?
I think that's a question for Qua, because Qua told me that happened. I had no idea how that all happened. Just everybody came to this commercial to check out the camera. It was a celebrity in its own right. Yeah. So I'm just this guy just bringing this camera in. And what Dustin wanted to do is that we didn't use the camera to actually film the commercial. He just wanted side-by-side comparisons, because the commercial was shot on 35 millimeter Arri film. So there's big canisters with film reels. And so they wanted me to just, stand side by side. When they roll a shot, I'd roll a shot. And then they want the opportunity to look side by side to see if it held up. And so Qua, like in the middle of and this is my first time being in Vietnam, language barriers and all kinds of stuff, and getting used to the heat, right? I mean, it's just like a whole nother world over there temperature wise. And me growing up in San Diego, where the
perfect temperature.
The weather's perfect for most of the year. So so it was a crazy experience. And then Qua, through all the dust flying, he comes through and just simply asked me, hey, I'm shooting my first movie, 14 days. I'm shooting this in March. Are you available to do it? I can talk to my producers. And so I absolutely said, yeah, let's keep in touch. So we kept in touch.
The one thing that really gets me going listening to your stories is at every junction, it seems to me that you have people that kind of like take you to the next chapter. What do you think, what is it about or how you've talked to people or how you connect with people that has brought you to that sort of that next chapter every time? Like doors just open up. Like, how did you meet Dustin? I mean, how did you meet these people? Like, what is it about your way of thinking that allows you to kind of like meet people who open doors for the next chapter?
I think it's honestly luck, and just the idea that whoever it is I'm talking to, just for whatever reason, and I'm not doing anything special. I'm just like, when I first met Slim, it was just like, I was just like, kind of wide-eyed kid going, hey, like, I love the music you're doing. And, I here's, my, can I get your phone number kind of thing. So that moment. And then, yeah, with, meeting Dustin, the opportunities, and it's just like networking. And that's a continual thing, right? We're always continually networking and reaching out. And what I try to do too, is that one thing I try to do within my ability and time frame and bandwidth is that I strong believer, as a lot of us are, in trying to help each other out. So now, like, in return, if someone comes up to me, I'll try my best to help them out within my ability too. I don't have the bandwidth to always do it, and I always like feel bad when I can't do it all the time. But I feel like it's a combination of luck, to be honest. I don't know what went through Slim's head when he gave me his phone number. I don't know. Maybe I should ask him one day, like, what compelled you? And the same thing, and we're going to get to this, is how I even met the Red co-founder. So again, he could have easily blew me off easily. Yeah. So, at some point. So it is fascinating. And
yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of get to the essence of that. What is it about your way of thinking that makes people go, okay, here are the keys to the car. Come, let's take a ride, because that's sort of like the underlying kind of theme in the last right, 20, 30 minutes. I just keep hearing that, things just keep happening. But I imagine for most successful people that keep making that kind of leap from one chapter to the next, and it's constantly people opening up their doors, and there's something about the way they think that allows that to happen.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I've asked, I did ask Ted, who I'll allude to shortly. Ted's one of the first founding member of the second founding member of the Red Camera, and I'll give you an interesting story on that. But I did ask him, I'm like, hey, what compelled you to engage with me? Because again, he gave me his phone number too. He's like, here's my phone number. Call me, and we'll do an interview. I wanted to interview him. That's how it started. He said that his mindset is that he feels like that anyone could end up being something. So he doesn't want to always shut the door on it. He said like he doesn't want to just shut the door on opportunities. So that's why he was so cool with talking to me when he had all these other reporters that he could have talked to, like from these big magazines and stuff like that. Getting inundated because the Red cameras at the height, still popular today, but it was especially so at that time because it was
revolutionary,
pushing the whole industry forward in terms of digital filmmaking. So yeah, no, it's something I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I never thought about it in that context. I just thought about it in the sense of, I think one thing that maybe comes off, and I hear a lot, I'm just myself, so it's hard for me to step back and view myself, but they see passion, I guess, so it's like, a common thing I hear from people is like, dude, I love your passion. And I'm like, I'm just me, man. I don't, I'm not trying to sound passionate by nature. It's just like when something excites you, you just go off the rails, right? You talk about it. So maybe there's some energy there. Maybe that helps. I don't know how else to explain it.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about was, so when you start getting into this new camera, how much, because I can imagine it being a lot of different subjects that are broken down to support the camera, right? Like you have lenses, you have the workflow that happens on the back end of it. There's all these technical things how do you know sort of where to put yourself through that process, because I'm sure Dominic might have asked you about, how much you can capture and what kind of lens are able to change out. Where at the time in your mind did you say, okay, this is where I'm going to be. I'm just going to handle renting or buying these cameras and renting them out, and I'm not going to worry about X, Y, and Z. How do you know where to focus your energy and your mindset?
I think I think it happened organically. And so to kind of give you a scoop, I was, as a side hustle, I felt like I needed, experience. Tui and I were shooting weddings. I mean,
Wow.
So we figured, again, it's that same concept. Like if I can make $500 doing a wedding, which is so low at the time, to be honest, like all the time that you put into editing all the stuff. When you add the hours, you're making less than minimum wage when you stretch it out. But the sum of money to in your mind, you're going, okay, one weekend of shooting, I make $500, whatever, up to maybe $1,000, and you start charging accordingly. So the crazy transition that we went through, and by the way, the crazy story was that when we locked in our first film, with Kwa, with Jimmy from Zhenfeng, we had to quit our jobs. So I quit my full-time job at the county. And at that time, I actually transitioned out of the social work thing. Again, this is my survival skills kicking in here. Normally, you have to put in your time in order to transition out of different departments when you're in this ecosystem of the child welfare services. You kind of put in your time. So where I ended up was it was a unit called the help desk, meaning that they help other workers deal with computer-related problems. And so, but you have to be a social worker to know how to navigate all that world, or you can't just be purely tech and then not know what the child welfare thing know and what goes on. So then they need to grandfather in a bunch of social workers that have been in the field for a long time. Then they get to move into getting off the field, right? Off the battleground.
Right.
And then into the office setting where you're not dealing with the chaos, you're dealing with it more of on a technical level, but you kind of have to have some seniority to get there, So I did it in a year, which was unheard of. And I didn't know it was unheard of because I'm just in my head, I'm just surviving, right? I'm just trying to transition to where I feel I need to be. So what happened was, I'll never forget the first day I get into the unit, which is to help people with the technical problems, because I'm a techie guy, by nature. One of the workers sized me up, and he just went to my cubicle. He looked at me. He's all like, "How long you've been working in the county?" And I said, "A year." And he's like, really? And then and then I remember him sizing me up, because it's like, basically it was broken down to me. It was like, everyone in there has worked for over 10 years before they got this opportunity to even think about getting out. Because,
Right.
and then I won him over in a day, because, within like minutes, he converted to Apple and all that. Like, I just had this, way about, infecting people with tech. So, anyway, so I won him over, and what happened was the county of San Diego had an open position, and it says you need to be a social worker that have all these skills, which included web and all that. So then I transitioned from the field and doing updates for social workers on the web. So like, they have this little internal internet where you do these announcements, so that, okay, this week you have to go to the social work training, right? So I'm that guy. So by that time, I transitioned to something closer to what, I was more tuned for. And then, so I quit that job. Tui quit her biotech job. She went to UCSD, valedictorian out of high school, went to UCSD, majored in biochem, worked for a biotech company, making, good money. I have a pretty stable, job at the county, working in website related stuff. So we're okay, kind of where we're at, and doing side hustle. And then, so we quit all of that, put all our stuff in storage, and literally just flew to Vietnam. So one day I was literally behind a cubicle at a computer. And then the very next day I'm inside some crazy canoe in humid conditions, shooting in the middle of like, these outskirt areas of Vietnam, shooting a movie, and couldn't be any happier. Right?
Yeah. And this is your second time in Vietnam, right?
Right. So this was the time where I finally, we secured the first job to fly out. And to your point, what I honestly filmed some music videos here and there, weddings, and then I put myself as a camera operator to film a feature film for Qua. So fortunately for me, they were willing to take a chance on me, and Dom literally had to hold my hand through everything, because I was definitely not a seasoned veteran when it came to movies, but I got into the hot seat, so I feel like, one desire that I always have, and again, the danger to doing these things is that, what if you're in over your head? What if you jumped into something you're not ready for?
What if you fuck up their project?
Exactly. I mean, all those things could happen. And fortunately, I got in and was able to adapt and help them do the movie. And to answer your question, it became a business without me knowing it. So they rented the camera, paid us to for the services. And then I essentially had to create this workflow for everybody to follow to get all this data ready for editing, right? So this whole process, this filmmaking process, was a requirement that we had to know how to do. And so that's what it became, was that I started just working on the films and supporting everything to deal with the camera. So it was by necessity, and what I was familiar and comfortable with. And I was happy just shooting movies. Like, I get to make some money renting the cameras. It became a business. So one movie, so after, Qua's movie, Victor Vu comes to the set, and then Victor's like, hey, I got another movie, coming out, that I'm filming in another month. Are you guys still going to be around? And then it snowballed. It went from movie. Then after that, Chin Huan from HK had another movie. And so it just started